The crimson dust of Xerion Prime clung to everything like dried blood, and Cale Drayton had long since stopped trying to brush it from his weathered jacket. His boots crunched across the crystalline debris field that had once been a magnificent city, now reduced to glittering ruins by some ancient catastrophe. The twin suns cast harsh shadows between the broken spires, making every step treacherous. "Another dead-end, boss," chirped Chip, his salvage droid hovering at shoulder height with its scanning array spinning lazily. "This sector's been picked clean by better crews than ours." Cale adjusted the strap of his plasma cutter and touched the hilt of the old steel sword at his hip, a relic from Earth that his grandfather had carried through the Terran Wars. Most spacers would have laughed at carrying such primitive metal, but it was all he had left of home. "Keep scanning," he muttered, stepping over a fallen archway carved with alien script. The geological reports mentioned energy signatures deeper in the ruins. They pressed through what must have been a ceremonial district, past statues of beings, with elongated limbs and graceful features, the Zalithi according to the archaeological databases, an extinct race that had vanished centuries before humans even achieved spaceflight. Their architecture soared in impossible curves, defying gravity with crystalline supports that still hummed with residual power. "Boss, I'm getting something big," Chip announced, its tone shifting to genuine interest. "Massive energy reading bearing 27 Mark 6. Whatever it is, it's been active for a very long time." Cale's pulse quickened. Active tech from a dead civilization could set him up for life. He followed Chip's guidance through a maze of collapsed walls until they reached what appeared to be a temple. The structure had survived better than the surrounding buildings, its walls inscribed with flowing script that seemed to pulse with faint luminescence. The entrance yawned before them, darkness beyond the reach of their lights. Cale activated his helmet's illumination array and stepped inside, immediately feeling the change in atmosphere. The air was cooler here, charged with an energy that made his skin tingle. "The readings are off the charts," Chip whispered, its usual chatter subdued by the temple's oppressive grandeur. They descended through chambers filled with alien artwork, frescoes depicting tall, elegant beings in flowing robes, their faces serene yet somehow sad. At the temple's heart, they found a circular chamber dominated by a raised dais. And there, in the center, was something that stopped Cale in his tracks. A woman, or something very like a woman, knelt in the chamber's center, her wrists and ankles bound by chains that seemed to be made of crystallized starlight. Her skin held a faint luminescence, pale blue-white like moonlight on snow, and her hair fell in silver waves past her shoulders. She wore robes that had once been magnificent but now hung in tatters. Her ears came to delicate points, and her features held an otherworldly beauty that made Cale's breath catch. But it was her eyes that held him, violet pools that spoke of centuries of pain and resignation. They tracked to him as he approached, showing neither hope nor fear, only weary acknowledgement of another visitor to her prison. Well, Chip commented, circling the dais with scientific curiosity. "Stasis field technology beyond anything in the databases. Those chains are generating a temporal lock. She's been frozen at this exact moment for, calculating, roughly 800 standard years." Cale found his voice. "You're alive." The woman's lips curved in the faintest smile. When she spoke, her voice was like distant music, speaking in accented but perfect standard. "Alive is perhaps generous. I am Thyra of the House of Stars, last empress of the Zalithi Dominion. And you, human, are the first visitor to look upon me with something other than greed." "The chains," Cale said, studying the crystalline bonds. "How do we—" "We do not," Thyra replied softly. "Many have tried. Warriors with plasma weapons, tech priests with quantum keys, treasure hunters with explosive charges. The chains were forged with the combined arts of science and magic. They cannot be broken by any weapon known to the civilized galaxy." Something in her resigned tone sparked rebellion in Cale's chest. Without thinking, he drew his grandfather's sword, plain steel worn smooth by generations of hands. Chip immediately began protesting about primitive metallurgy and impossible physics. but Kyle ignored the droid. Maybe they just haven't tried the right weapon, he said, and brought the blade down on the nearest chain. The metal sang as it struck crystal, and the chain shattered like spun glass. Retry. The silence that followed the shattering of the first chain was profound, broken only by the faint tinkling of crystalline fragments hitting the temple floor. Thyra stared at her freed wrist with something approaching wonder, flexing fingers that hadn't moved in 8 centuries. Impossible, she whispered, her voice stronger now, gaining resonance as the temporal lock's grip weakened. Kale moved quickly, striking each remaining chain with his grandfather's blade, each one shattered at the touch of simple steel, as if they had only been waiting for the right moment to release their prisoner. As the final chain fell away, Thyra collapsed forward, caught only by Kale's quick reflexes. She was lighter than he expected, her body trembling with the effort of movement after so long in stasis. Her skin was warm against his, surprisingly human despite its ethereal glow, and he could feel her heart beating rapidly beneath the tattered silk of her robes. "Easy," he murmured, helping her sit on the edge of the dais. "You've been locked in place for 800 years. Your body needs time to remember how to function." Chip hovered nearby, scanners working overtime. "Boss, her bio readings are stabilizing, but she's severely weakened. Whatever that stasis field was doing, it kept her alive but didn't provide proper nourishment." Thyra's violet eyes met Kale's, and for the first time he saw genuine emotion there, gratitude mixed with something deeper. "You freed me with a blade of simple iron. How is this possible?" "Steel, actually," Kale said, offering her water from his survival pack. "And I have no idea. I'm just a salvager who got lucky." She accepted the water gratefully, her hands steadying as strength returned to her limbs. "There was a prophecy," she said slowly, as if remembering something from a dream. "My people's oldest text spoke of chains that could only be broken by one untouched by the arts, someone pure of the old magics and new sciences alike. I thought it mere wishful thinking during my darkest hours." "Tell me what happened," Kale said, settling beside her on the dais. "Why were you imprisoned?" Thyra's expression darkened, centuries of pain flickering across her features. "The Dominion Empire, my empire, was built on conquest and subjugation. We took species after species as slaves, justified it as bringing order to chaos. I was raised to believe this was our right, our burden." She paused, her hands clenched in her lap. "But I began to see the truth. The suffering we caused, the children torn from families, the civilizations ground to dust beneath our need for control." Her voice grew stronger as she spoke, passion replacing weakness. "I tried to change things. From within. I freed entire slave worlds, granted citizenship to conquered peoples, dismantled the breeding programs. My own council called it heresy. My generals called it treason. And they punished you for doing what was right," Kale said quietly. "They could not execute me. I was of the royal bloodline, protected by ancient laws. But they could remove me from power." Thyra's laugh was bitter. "The High Mages crafted these chains specifically for me, designed to hold me until I came to my senses and agreed to restore the old ways. They expected I would break after a few decades. Instead, I chose to wait for someone like you." The way she said "someone like you" sent warmth through Kale's chest. There was something in her gaze now, curiosity and attraction mixing with gratitude. "I'm nobody special," he said, "just a human trying to make a living among the stars." "Just a human," she repeated, and her hand found his. Her touch was electric, sending shivers up his arm. "Your people are still young to the galaxy, aren't they? Unburdened by the accumulated weight of ancient power and old sins." Their faces were close now, and Kale found himself lost in those violet eyes. "Thyra, She silenced him with a kiss, soft and tentative at first, then deeper as 8 centuries of isolation found release. Her lips tasted of starlight and sorrow, and when they parted, both were breathing hard. "Forgive me," she whispered against his mouth. "It has been so long since I felt anything but cold stone and metal." "Nothing to forgive," Kale replied, his hand cupping her cheek. But we should get you somewhere safe. Your people. Do any loyal to you still live? Thyra's expression shifted, becoming alert and focused. Some, perhaps. But first we must leave this place. The chains were not merely my prison, they were also a monitoring system. Now that they are broken, she stood, testing her strength. My former council will know I am free. As if summoned by her words, Chip's sensors began screaming warnings. Boss, ships incoming, big ones, and they're not broadcasting standard identification codes. Through the temple's ancient stone, they could hear the thunder of atmospheric engines. Thyra moved to a wall covered in Zalithi script, her hands dancing over hidden controls. A section of stone slid away, revealing a passage carved into the rock. This way, she said urgently. The old temples were built with escape routes. As they fled through the darkened corridor, Thyra's hand found Kale's again. In the brief moment before they were fully consumed by their flight, she squeezed his fingers. Thank you, she said simply. For everything. Behind them, the sound of blaster fire and shouted orders filled the temple as Imperial forces searched for their escaped prisoner. But ahead lay only darkness and possibility, and the beginning of something that would shake the foundations of an empire built on chains. The underground passages beneath the temple complex were a maze of carved stone and ancient machinery, lit by the same ethereal phosphorescence that had illuminated the chains. Thyra led them through the labyrinth with the confidence of someone who had spent centuries memorizing every stone, every turn. These tunnels connect to the old transit system, she explained, as they jogged through a corridor lined with dormant crystal arrays. If we can reach the maintenance hubs, we might find a way off-world. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit grew closer. The harsh bark of military orders in the Dominion tongue, the whine of energy weapons charging. Chip's sensors painted a grim picture. 24 Imperial soldiers, armed with the latest plasma, technology and tracking gear. They're using bioscanners, the droid reported nervously. They'll find us eventually. Kale drew his sidearm, checking the charge. How long since you've seen combat? He asked Thyra. 800 years, she replied grimly. But some skills are not easily forgotten. They reached a junction where several passages converged around a central chamber. Ancient control panels still glowed with power, their surfaces covered in the flowing script of Thyra's people. She placed her hands on the primary console, and the systems responded to her touch with a harmonic chime. Biosecurity still recognizes me, she murmured with satisfaction. I'm activating the old defense protocols. The tunnel behind them suddenly filled with a shimmering energy barrier. The sound of Imperial boots came to an abrupt halt, followed by frustrated shouts and the crackling of weapons fire against the shield. That will hold them, but not for long, Thyra said. We need to move. They pressed deeper into the system, following maintenance corridors that grew narrower and more cramped. At one point, they were forced to crawl through a service duct barely wide enough for 2 people, their bodies pressed close together in the confined space. I never imagined my return to the galaxy would involve quite so much crawling, Thyra said, a note of humor breaking through the tension. Stick with me, Kale replied, acutely aware of her warmth against his back. I specialize in undignified escapes. They emerged into a wider space, some kind of equipment chamber filled with dormant machinery. Thyra activated emergency lighting, revealing their surroundings in soft blue radiance. Here, finally, they could rest. Tell me about your world, Thyra said as they caught their breath. Your Earth. What is it like to grow up free of the weight of empire? Kyle settled beside her against a wall, their shoulders touching. Complicated. We have our own problems, wars, injustice, people who think they're better than others. But we're still figuring things out, still arguing about what's right. Maybe that's the difference. You argue, she said thoughtfully. We decreed. We imposed our will and called it order. Her hand found his in the darkness. I've been thinking about what you said, about being nobody special. But you are, Kale. You looked at someone in chains and your first instinct was to set them free. That's rare. The way she spoke his name sent warmth through his chest. Anyone would have done the same. No, she said firmly. They wouldn't. I've had 8 centuries to watch visitors to my prison. Some came for treasure, some for glory, some simply for the story they could tell. But you looked at me and saw someone who was tired of waiting. Their faces were close again in the dim light, and Kale could see the pain of centuries slowly giving way to something else. Hope, perhaps, or the beginning of it. Thyra, he said quietly, what happens when we get out of here? You're the rightful empress of a galactic empire. I'm a salvager from a backwater world. Whatever this is between us. She silenced him with a kiss, fiercer than the first, full of desperate hunger for connection after so long alone. When they parted, her violet eyes blazed with determination. Then, we changed the rules, she said simply. I've spent 800 years thinking about how to make things right. And I believe, no, I know, that the answer isn't returning to the old ways. It's finding new ones. The sound of energy weapons grew louder. The Imperial forces had breached the barrier. We need to go, Kale said, but Thyra pulled him back for another kiss. This one soft and full of promise. Whatever comes next, she whispered against his lips. Know that you've already given me something I thought lost forever. What's that? Hope. They moved deeper into the complex, following service tunnels toward what Thyra hoped would be a way to the surface. Behind them, the hunt continued, but ahead lay the possibility of escape and the chance to build something neither of their peoples had seen before. 3 months after their escape from Zerion Prime, Kale found himself in the belly of a converted cargo hauler, surrounded by the strangest collection of rebels he'd ever encountered. The ship Free Horizon served as mobile headquarters for the Scattered Chain, a growing network of resistance cells fighting the Dominion Empire across a dozen systems. The Imperial garrison on Kalara 7th has been reinforced, reported Commander Vex, a battle-scarred Helion whose blue-scaled skin bore the ritual scars of his warrior caste. 3 dreadnoughts and a full Marine division. They're expecting trouble. They should be, Thyra said from her position at the head of the tactical display. In the months since her liberation, she had transformed from weakened prisoner to formidable resistance leader. Her silver hair was now braided in the style of her ancestors, and she wore form-fitting combat gear that accentuated her tall, graceful frame. Kalara is a key supply hub for their slave operations. Cut it off and we strangle their logistics in the outer rim. Kyle watched her work, admiring the way she commanded respect from beings who had never known her rule but recognized her natural authority. The months had changed them both. Their initial attraction had deepened into something profound and unshakable, a partnership that extended far beyond the physical. The question is approach, continued another rebel, a human named Torres who'd fled Imperial occupation of his homeworld. Their sensor net will pick up any conventional assault force long before we reach weapons range. Thyra's violet eyes found Kale's across the room, and he saw the familiar spark of an idea forming. They'd developed an almost telepathic connection during their time together, able to read each other's thoughts in the heat of battle or the quiet moments stolen between missions. What about unconventional? Kyle suggested, stepping forward to join the group around the holo display. The Empire's strength has always been their technology, their overwhelming firepower, but they're not used to fighting people who refuse to play by their rules. Elaborate, Vex growled, his golden eyes fixed on the human with grudging respect. We don't hit them head-on, Kale continued, his salvager's knowledge of ship systems coming to the fore. We hit them from inside. I've been studying Imperial freighter manifests. There's a supply convoy due at Kalara in 48 hours. If we could intercept it, replace some of the cargo. With what? Torres asked. Thyra smiled, expression that had once meant doom for her enemies. With ourselves. The plan that emerged from their discussion was audacious even by resistance standards. They would intercept the supply convoy at the edge of the Kalara system, substitute their own people for legitimate cargo, then let the Imperials transport them directly into the heart of the garrison. It's insane, Vex concluded after they'd worked out the details. The margin for error is essentially zero. Then we don't make errors, Thyra said simply. Commander, begin preparations. I want strike teams ready in 18 hours. As the meeting broke up, Kale lingered behind with Thyra in the tactical center. The moment they were alone, she was in his arms, their lips meeting with the desperate passion of lovers who knew each mission might be their last. I should lead the infiltration team, she said against his mouth. Absolutely not, he replied, his hands tangled in her silver hair. You're too valuable to risk. I'm valuable because I know Imperial systems better than anyone, she countered, her body pressed against his. And because my people need to see that their empress is willing to bleed for freedom. He wanted to argue, but he knew she was right. Instead, he deepened their kiss, pouring all his fear and love and pride into the connection between them. When they finally parted, both were breathing hard. Then I'm going with you, he said. Kale, no arguments. We're partners, remember? In everything. That night, in the privacy of Thyra's quarters, they made love with an intensity born of shared danger and deeper connection. Her luminescent skin seemed to glow brighter in the darkness, and when she cried out his name as they moved together, it was like music from another world. Afterward, they lay entwined on her narrow bunk, her head on his chest as he traced patterns on her bare shoulder. When this is over, she said quietly, when the Empire falls and my people are free, what then? Then we figure out what comes next, Kyle replied, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. Together. The nobles who supported my exile, they'll expect me to return to the old ways to restore the traditional hierarchy. They won't understand what I've learned, what you've taught me. Which is? She lifted her head to look at him, her violet eyes serious in the dim light. That real strength doesn't come from the power to command, but from the courage to serve. That love is not weakness, but the foundation of everything worth fighting for. The next morning brought the controlled chaos of mission preparation. As Kale checked his gear for the third time, Chip hovered nearby with what passed for anxiety and a droid. Boss, I've run the probability calculation 17 times. The chances of this working are— Don't tell me, Kyle interrupted. Some things are worth doing regardless of the odds. Across the bay, Thyra was addressing the infiltration team, her voice carrying the authority of someone born to command, but tempered by the wisdom of suffering. She caught his eye and smiled. The private smile she saved just for him. Let's go steal a space station, she said. The throne room of the Imperial Palace on Dominion Prime had not seen its rightful occupant for 8 centuries, but as Thyra strode through the massive doors flanked by her revolutionary army, it was as if she had never left. The towering columns of black stone, the ceremonial braziers that burned with eternal flame, the crystal windows that showed the stars beyond, all remained exactly as she remembered. What had changed was everything else. The loyalist forces that had ruled in her absence knelt before her in defeat, their weapons cast aside, and their proud uniforms torn by battle. At their head knelt High Mage Corvin, the architect of her imprisonment, his ancient face twisted with fury and disbelief. Impossible, he rasped. The chains were unbreakable. The stasis should have held you until the heat death of the universe. You forgot the oldest lesson of our people, Thyra replied, her voice carrying clearly through the vast chamber. That power without wisdom is merely tyranny, and tyranny always falls. She gestured to Kale, who stood at her right hand despite the battle gear that marked him as a common soldier. It took someone untainted by our prejudices to show me the truth you never understood. The final battle for the capital had raged for 3 days. Thyra's forces, now calling themselves the Liberation Fleet, had struck simultaneously across a dozen worlds, coordinating with resistance cells that had been quietly building strength for months. The key had been Thyra's intimate knowledge of Imperial systems, and the loyalty she inspired in subjects who remembered her original attempt at reform. But it was Kale's tactical brilliance that had turned the tide. His experience as a salvager, combined with his outsider's perspective on Imperial doctrine, had allowed him to devise strategies that confounded the enemy's expectations. When conventional wisdom called for direct assault, he struck from unexpected angles. When military protocol demanded formations and ranks, He used guerrilla tactics that turned the Empire's size against itself. The old ways are dead, Thyra continued, addressing not just the defeated nobles but the cameras that would carry her words to every world in Imperial space. No more will we build our prosperity on the backs of slaves. No more will we crush other cultures beneath the weight of our supposed superiority. From this day forward, the Dominion becomes what it should always have been, a union of equals, not a hierarchy of oppression. Murmurs rippled through the assembled crowd. Some sounds were approving, others less so. Change would not come easily to a civilization built on conquest and control. "And what of the humans?" called out one of the noble prisoners, his voice filled with disdain. "Will you elevate these primitives to rule alongside the blood of ages?" Thyra's violet eyes blazed with dangerous fire. "I will elevate anyone who proves themselves worthy through deed and character, regardless of species or bloodline. And I will cast down anyone who clings to the poison of old prejudices." She turned to Kale, her expression softening. "The human who stands beside me has shown more honor in 6 months than some of you have in 6 centuries. Kale stepped forward, uncomfortable with the attention but understanding its necessity. "Your Majesty speaks of union and equality. My people, humans, we're still young to this galaxy. We make mistakes, we argue, we stumble around trying to figure out what's right. But we're willing to learn, and we're willing to stand beside anyone who shares that goal." "Well spoken," Thyra said, and the pride in her voice was unmistakable. "Commander Drayton will serve as the first human ambassador to the reformed Dominion, with full authority to negotiate humanity's integration into our alliance." The title was news to Kale, but he didn't flinch. They had discussed the need for such positions during their long strategy sessions, though he hadn't expected to fill one himself. "The transition will not be easy," Thyra continued, addressing the broader assembly. "There will be those who resist change, who prefer the certainty of oppression to the uncertainty of freedom. But we will build something new together, a government that serves its people rather than demanding their servitude." Later, in the privacy of the imperial apartments that had once been Thyra's childhood home, they finally had a moment alone. The rooms were vast and luxurious, filled with artwork and treasures from across the galaxy, but Kale found himself thinking of their cramped quarters aboard the Free Horizon. "Regrets?" Thyra asked, reading his expression as she always could. "About us? Never." He pulled her into his arms, marveling as always at how perfectly she fit against him despite their different origins. "About this palace, though, it's a long way from salvaging scrap metal." She laughed, the sound like silver bells in the ornate chamber. "We could always go back to sleeping in cargo holds and eating ration packs if you prefer." "Don't tempt me," he replied, then grew serious. "Thyra, what we have, it's going to be complicated now. You're an empress again, You're my chosen consort," she interrupted firmly. "By right of liberation, by right of love, and by right of everything we've built together. Let the nobles whisper. Let the old families scheme. What matters is that we continue building the future we dreamed of in those dark tunnels beneath Zarian Prime." That night, as they lay together in the imperial bed with starlight streaming through crystal windows, Kale reflected on the impossible journey that had brought them here. A salvager's routine exploration had become the catalyst for revolution, and a chance encounter with a chained prisoner had grown into a love that would reshape the galaxy. "What are you thinking about?" Thyra whispered against his chest. "Just wondering what my grandfather would say if he could see me now. His old sword freed an alien empress and toppled an empire. Your grandfather's sword," she corrected gently, "was wielded by a man brave enough to strike chains that no one else could break. The blade was just metal. The courage was all yours." Outside their window, the first ships of the new alliance were already arriving. Vessels from a dozen species eager to be part of something unprecedented. Human freighters flew alongside Helian battlecruisers and Valdari science ships, their crews united by a common goal. The age of the Dominion Empire was over. The age of the Galactic Alliance had begun. And at its heart, the love between a human Salvager and an alien empress would stand as proof that even the strongest chains could be broken by someone willing to try. In the months and years that followed, historians would debate the causes of the imperial collapse, analyzing economics and politics and military strategy. But those who lived through it knew the truth, that sometimes the most profound changes begin with a single act of compassion, one person looking at another's suffering and deciding it cannot be allowed to continue. The chains were broken. The revolution was won, and love, as it always does, had found a way.